Hey everybody, welcome back. We've got about 3 minutes till class time for now. Hope you guys are doing well and had a good weekend. And just hang in there and we'll be ready to go in just a few. Hi Gabby, how's it going? Good to see you. Hi Alicia, how's it going? Good to see you. Hi Kevin, good to see you too. Just 2 more minutes pretty much. Hi Tina. Hey Diego. Sylvia, Angelina, Angela, good to see everybody. Hi Spencer, welcome back. Just another couple of moments and we'll be ready to roll. Hi Alan, hey Annalie. And then Peachy's here, so say hello. Hey Sarah, hey AJ. Good girl, Peach. Yeah, it's been a good day so far. Can't complain. Everything's been pretty smooth so far today. So this is my last meeting, and then when I'm done here teaching you guys this stuff on philosophy of religion and ethics, I'm free for the remainder of the day. I might just go for a run, do something kind of chill. But anyways, welcome back, guys. It's 2:30, so I'm going to let things get underway. Hope you had a good weekend and that everything's going well with all your other classes too. If you haven't yet had a chance, as usual, just try to make sure you say hello or just type any kind of comment into the chat. And then that'll be my way of keeping track of attendance if I ever need it for any reason. So yeah, thanks again. Okay, so what we got to do for now is we've got to finish off these last couple of authors on the philosophy of religion topic. Now, can you guys remember? I think we were in the middle of Robert McKim's paper. Isn't that true? Isn't that true? From last Wednesday. So I was telling you about the hiddenness of God. And go back in your memory or your notes or both. Let me know. Were we all talking about the whole case of the island where there's this community of people and no one's ever been there before? Hey there, guys. Good to see everybody. Let me know in the chat what you remember as your last couple of things, and then I'll just go right back into it from there. I just looked at the video, so I kind of have a sense of it, but I kind of wanted to hear your feedback so I know that you're on the same page with me. Okay, well, Diego, thanks. I can see that you're telling me that we were in the middle of it. So let me just bring you back up to speed. So we're going to make short work of these last two papers in philosophy of religion, and then that'll be the last day of it to talk about it today. Robert McKim's paper is from 2001, and it's called The Hiddenness of God. Okay, Robert McKim, Hiddenness of God. So let me just tell you the first couple of things in this paper. And hello again, one and all. I'm glad to see you guys that are here. So in the paper, he starts off with this hypothetical scenario of an island where there's a community of people. There's a civilization of people that live there on the island. The thing is, as far as they know, this is the whole human civilization because nobody on the island has ever left, and they've never seen anybody come from outside of the island either. So if you ask someone that lives there, for all they know, there's no people anywhere else, and this is the whole world of human beings. Okay? But there are these myths and legends, rumors that come from some of the elders of the community. And what they say is that the island actually used to be this bigger empire. It used to be a part of a bigger empire. So the rumor says that although it is believed today to be just an isolated land, that way back in the annals of history, it used to be part of a bigger empire. And the rumor and myth also said that there used to be this great and good emperor who ruled over the whole empire. All right? But those are stories, and they're somewhat shrouded in cultural myth, and so people don't know whether those are real or just made up make-believe stories. One day, though, people are coming in from the ocean and on ships. So members of the island community gather on the beach to see these arriving visitors. So one of the ships comes down, and from the ship, a couple of people speak to the assembled crowd, and they say, "Hey, everybody. So first of all, we want to tell you a couple of things. We know that you heard that this is an island that used to be part of a bigger empire, and we want to confirm that for you guys. We're here to tell you that's all true. Those are facts. That's not just a myth. This is part of a bigger empire. The only thing is you guys have kind of lost touch with the other parts of the empire. You've become disconnected from it over time, but it is still there, that there is this big empire, and you guys are actually still part of it, even though you've forgotten that. And then the other thing is, you heard about the great emperor that rules over it all. That's also true. In fact, he sent us, and the reason that he sent us was because he wanted us to deliver this message to you, that he wants to reclaim this land as part of the empire, and he's asking you to give him his total loyalty and devotion, because you're going to be his subjects. So what will you guys say? Oh, but there's a catch. And you guys remember the catch? They say, the thing about the emperor that we were just mentioning is that we all call him the hidden emperor. Why do they call him the hidden emperor? Well, because he's never revealed himself to anybody. So he won't let himself be seen or perceived by any of the five senses. So that's the deal. He's the emperor. He rules the empire. We want you guys to say you believe in him and that you're going to follow him. But he's hidden, and he's never shown himself to anybody. And despite that, we all believe he exists. We think that he can become invisible, that he can read minds, that he can be in more than one place at a time. So back to our question, audience. This is the people from the boat speaking. What is it going to be? Will you show that you're going to declare loyalty to him or not? Okay, so from that point, we have a couple of members of the audience that step forward and give their reaction. So one of them is described as a man with a beard. My artistic skills are not great, but here we go. There's the bearded guy. You see? So this guy starts to talk, and he says, "Hey, everybody, listen. I want to speak to my fellow islanders," or whatever. Are you hearing what these people are saying behind me? They say that we are part of this big empire, and there's this emperor. And I was following them, and I was with them. I was on board for most everything. But then when they started saying that he's hidden, that's where you lost me. What do you mean hidden? How is the emperor hidden? I don't get it. Like, if there really is the emperor, wouldn't he just show himself to us? I mean, it doesn't make sense to say, "Hey, everybody, believe in me, devote your whole life to me, submit to me as your ruler," but you're not even going to reveal yourself. How do we know that you even exist? If you're telling us that it matters to him that we believe in him, then I think the normal thing is he would just show himself so nobody had any questions about whether he exists. This is all this guy speaking, the skeptic from the audience. And he says, if he really wanted us to believe in him, then that would be easy. All he has to do is show himself to us, and we can get over our doubts and skepticism about whether he really exists. So I don't know. I feel like the missionaries that have come from these boats are confused, or they're trying to deceive us, because I just don't think there's any such thing as a hidden emperor. Come on, that's what he says, okay? But after he speaks, another woman comes forward from the crowd, just described in the book as a woman. So I'm just trying to draw a woman. I know not every woman has long hair, but just to give you a visual. She has an opposite point of view from him. So she says, "But hold on, my friend. I think that there could be a reason why he wants to stay hidden. Maybe there's a valid, legitimate reason for that, because if he's hidden, it gives us all a choice whether we're going to believe in him or not. If he wasn't hidden and you could just look out and just see him with your eyes, then there would be no decision to make about whether you choose to believe in him, because seeing is believing. And in that case, you could not deny that he exists. So maybe it's important to this emperor to test our loyalty and faith by requiring us to make a little leap of faith given that there's no obvious verifiable evidence that he exists. So I kind of see the point. He wants to, test us a little bit and not make it so easy for us to believe in him, to see who's going to take that decision. And maybe also it kind of intensifies the heightened majesty that he has over and above us. Since he's hidden and we are not, it kind of makes him more mysterious, makes him seem more powerful and impressive. So actually, I don't know. I think there is an emperor, that he is hidden, and it makes sense. He comes back and he says, come on, I don't agree with you. What is good about believing in something when you don't have good evidence for it? He's now sort of channeling W.K. Clifford, if you remember his essay, like it's wrong to believe in things without sufficient evidence. And so he says that if there's not good evidence and he's not out in the open and we can't tell that he exists, shouldn't we just sort of say, I don't know, or I need more proof or whatever? So I'm sticking to my guns. I just don't think there's an emperor. Okay, now after these two have had their back and forth, one guy steps up who's kind of this in the middle moderate, So here's our middle ground guy here. And what he says is, okay, you guys, look, I feel like I see you both have made reasonable points, and let me tell each of you where I think you had a reasonable idea. First of all, on your behalf, ma'am, he says, the bearded guy says there's no evidence that the emperor exists. He's hidden. There's no evidence that he exists. I just don't believe in him. But I wouldn't agree exactly. I don't think there's no evidence that he exists. After all, there's some evidence because these people are here telling us he exists. So these missionaries testify that he exists. Now that's not like direct observable evidence of him, but it's not nothing either. It's people saying that he exists. And by the way, that's also corroborated by these stories we've heard from our old elders. So those are two reasons to just say maybe there is an emperor, even though he's not out in the open showing himself. But he continues. He says, at the same time, though, I thought you made a good point, sir, the bearded guy, when you said that maybe if the emperor is hidden, it's a weird way to behave. If you really wanted us to believe in him, then he should show himself. So the middle ground guy in the middle, he comes up with this kind of position. He says, so the hiddenness of the emperor could mean two things. Number one, it might mean there's just no emperor, and that's an obvious explanation as to why he appears hidden. Or it could be that he does exist, and he chooses to stay hidden. But if that's the case, I have doubts as to whether he really cares whether we believe in him or not. Because, right, if he cared that we believed in him, and that matters a lot to him, then he would want to make it easy for us to do that. He wouldn't want to make us have to guess or, just speculate about whether he exists. He would want to give us clear proof. So if he exists and he's hidden, I doubt that he really cares one way or the other whether we declare our loyalty to him. So these then are three different positions on the topic of our hidden emperor scenario. But really, I hope you guys understand that this is just like three little metaphors for the real question we're interested in, which is, what should somebody think about the fact that God is hidden, right? God is like the emperor, basically, that they symbolize. The emperor symbolizes God because he's this majestic figure who asks you for loyalty, or whose messengers do. And nonetheless, he's hidden and not easy to determine for absolute certainty that he exists. So what should we think about the question to devote ourselves to this hidden being? Well, one person's perspective is given by this guy, and he stands for the skeptic. This is the sort of person who's like, I don't believe in the existence of whatever, this God, because I just can't verify it with my five senses. And so I'm going to remain doubtful. If I can't see, hear, taste, touch, feel the thing, it must not really exist. On the opposite side of the divider here, this woman stands for the believer, the person who says, I still believe, though, even though God is hidden, in this case the emperor, but really we're talking about God. So even though God is hidden, I still believe there's a valuable reason for him to be hidden. Maybe he wants to test our faith. Maybe he wants to make it something that's not so obvious, but rather a matter of taking a small leap of faith, So that's the believer's point of view. And then this guy in the middle is supposed to be somewhat in between. And McKim calls this person the tentative believer. So the tentative believer is kind of like, this is their view. God's hidden, and maybe there is no God, and that's what that means. Or maybe it means that there is a God that chooses to be hidden, but just like as we said with the emperor, if God chooses to stay hidden, then maybe he doesn't really care too much about whether we actually believe in him or not. Because if he did care about that, then he would reveal himself in a way we could all see, and then we would all be on the same page, and we would all believe in him. So tentative believer says the hiddenness must or may mean that there's no God, or in case there is, this indicates this lack of interest in our belief status. Now, before I go on a little further, because there's just a little more on this paper, I want you guys to understand clearly how this could be seen as a second possible objection to Pascal's wager. Because, right, essay prompt topic number 1 involves giving 2 objections to both Anselm and the ontological argument, and 2 objections to Pascal and the wager. One objection to Pascal's wager we spoke of last time, which is W.K. Clifford's Ethics of Belief article, right? The whole idea there that it's wrong to believe in things unless you have sufficient evidence. And so just as the ship owner is wrong for believing his ship will successfully return home, even though it's clear that it probably won't, I guess he would think it's also wrong for a person to hold fast to a belief in something without sufficient evidence. So Pascal's saying believe in God, even though it can't be proven and there's no evidence to prove it. That would be wrong according to Clifford. Now McKim is saying that the hiddenness of God really raises doubts about his existence, and even if he does exist, the fact that he's hidden makes a person question whether he is interested at all in our belief state in him. McKim sides with the tentative believer in the end. So this is the person's perspective that he thinks makes the most sense. The author says, I believe what the tentative believer believes, which is that the hiddenness of God may mean there's no such thing, or that there is a God, but his hiddenness indicates that he's not interested in whether you believe in him or not. So now looking back at Pascal's wager, okay, Pascal's wager is totally based on the idea that God definitely cares whether you believe in him or not. Because the wager says that if you don't believe and there is a God, then he will either punish you or he would lock you out of heaven. And he also says that if you do believe and there's a God, then God would favor you because he wants you to believe in him, and then he would send you to heaven. But if we don't think God cares one way or the other, if you believe or if you don't believe, then that would make the wager fall apart, because the wager says God wants you to believe and he rewards you if you do, and he would punish you or fail to reward you if you do not. But of course, if God didn't care either way, then a believer might not get any reward, and a non-believer might not get any punishment. So it could be that God doesn't determine the dispensation of your soul in the afterlife based on your belief status, or it could be that he determines it on some other basis altogether. But being hidden, McKim is saying, doesn't show us a God that really wants us to necessarily have to believe in him, because he's not making it easy for us to do that. So after this, he goes into a list of what he calls disadvantages of God's hiddenness. Okay, so I want to quickly talk about that, and then that'll be the end of the paper. First, let's create a heading: disadvantages of God's hiddenness. Okay, disadvantages of God's hiddenness. Hi, Evan, and everybody else, Mia, Ruby, Ricardo. I see you guys. That's really good to be with you. What he's calling disadvantages of God's hiddenness. So these are things that are not so good, or they're not ideal, at least, about God being hidden. These are things that are negative factors of God being hidden, and that if he was not hidden, these disadvantages would not exist. Okay, so first of all, one of the so-called disadvantages that he mentions is that God being hidden makes it harder for everybody to believe in him. So makes it harder to believe in God. It makes it hard to believe that God exists. Okay, so most people believe in God. If you just look at statistical tables about that question or about that fact. Most people worldwide believe in God, but not everybody does. And to those that don't, you might wonder, why not? Well, the stereotype of a person not believing in God because there's something wrong with them, or like they're a bad person, this is usually not at all true. Mostly, it's just a person who thinks, I would want to have really good evidence before I believed in anything. And the evidence for God's existence is weak at best, so that's the reason that many people who choose not to believe in God don't believe in him. It's not like they're thumbing their nose at the idea of the divine or at morality or anything else, but rather just they need better proof. They're thinking like Clifford does, right? Without better proof, I wouldn't say I believe in something. But ask yourself, what would cause these skeptics to come off of the sidelines and say, never mind, I do believe in God now? Well, obviously, one thing that would compel everybody to believe is if God just revealed himself to everyone so that there would be no questions at all, and it was clear. Since he remains hidden and shrouded from easy verification, and that makes it harder for at least some people to overcome their doubts and skepticism. So they say in the world religions that we know of, the major monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and others, that you're supposed to believe in God. It's a good thing to believe in God. It's bad not to. And that you should feel a sense of pride if you do, or even shame or something if you don't. But God being hidden, he's not making it as easy as he possibly could for everybody to do this good thing, I guess. So if more people ought to believe in God, God being hidden is standing in the way of that. It's kind of one thing that's an obstacle some people can't overcome, because it allows for the possibility of these kind of doubts. Now, if God was not hidden and you could just look over into the sky and you just see, look right there, you can see the Heavenly Father just floating in the sky, then there would no longer be this debate. We wouldn't be having this conversation in this class, because it would be an immediately and obvious fact to everybody that God does exist. So one disadvantage, him being hidden, makes it harder for everybody to follow the belief that God exists. A second disadvantage after that is that it also makes it harder for people to have a close personal relationship with God. Okay, so in those major religions I mentioned, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, especially Christianity, really, you're told not just that you have to believe that God exists, which is, of course, the bare minimum, but on top of that, you're also supposed to try and maintain, establish, foster, nurture this close personal relationship with God, But ask yourself, what does a close personal relationship really involve, even between people? Well, it involves things like trust, respect, communication, the sharing of hopes, dreams, fears, your vulnerabilities, communication, openness. Now, it's hard for some people to find themselves in this type of vulnerable, open, confessional sort of state with a being who they don't know for a fact exists. So it's just harder for some people to, again, overcome the doubts that come from God being hidden, to place themselves in this type of, highly personal and intimate, close relationship. Now, if God wasn't hidden, and there were just absolutely no debate or doubt that he existed, I guarantee you that everybody would rush to be the closest personal friend of God, because, that's a divine being with omnipotent power, and he's perfectly good. So you would want to be the friend of God who can rely on him for the deliverance of your prayers and etc. But because God is hidden, some people say, well, I don't know if he's really real. And therefore, I'm not so comfortable entering into the type of relationship that is described as close and personal. So that's another thing. If God wasn't hidden, everyone would jump to be in this type of close relationship with a being they know exists for a fact. Now, a third disadvantage mentioned after that is that it also makes it harder for people to devote themselves to and to worship God. Okay, so in the major world religions, you are told to believe in God, to have a close personal relationship with him, but beyond that also, you're supposed to be devoted to God and to totally worship him. You're supposed to submit yourself to the will of God, because he is this supreme being, and they say you're supposed to praise him, spread his word to others, and utterly submit yourself to his will. But again, one thing that makes it hard for some people to enter into this devoted and worshipful stance, that takes a heavy dose of humility and perspective. And for some anyway, they're not comfortable doing that if they're not sure that the being really exists. So if God wasn't hidden, I'm sure people would want to definitely devote their lives and their worship to him, because there would be no questions that it would be a worthy effort, and it wouldn't be a waste of time dedicating yourself to a being that you don't know whether they really exist. Okay, so here are 3 different disadvantages. If God wasn't hidden, none of these would exist. If God was not hidden and everyone knew he existed, everyone would believe in him, they'd all have a close relationship, and they'd all devote themselves to him and worship him. So 3 things become a little harder with God being hidden. That's the point so far. There's just two more little disadvantages that he also mentioned. So I'm going to put them up at the top since we've already seen the header of these notes, but two more items under the same header, two more disadvantages. One more is that it also creates social conflict and disagreement between people, okay? Create social conflict and disagreement. And I see your comment here, Sarah, so let me get that really fast. Hi there, Jack. How's it going? Sarah, if God does exist, would it be a possible argument that he stays hidden so that people do not take him for granted, for they could just go to him and pray to him to improve their lives? Well, yes. I mean, that's kind of the point of view given by the woman who speaks in the hypothetical scenario of the island community. She says, being hidden, it maybe causes people to have to choose whether to believe in him, but maybe your point is slightly different. You say people don't take him for granted. Okay, so what you're thinking is that if God was just out in the open, you know, everyone sees him all the time, and there's like with their eyes, you know, not like just in their head or something. Then in that case, they would know he exists and they would just take him for granted. Like they wouldn't care that he exists or something. I don't know though. I mean, it wouldn't be like just looking up and seeing the moon or something at night. It would be an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly good, omnipresent being. So, I mean, if you knew for a fact that a being like that existed, I mean, maybe you're religious already. I have no idea, you, the individual. But take, for example, the most hardcore atheist skeptic. Don't you think that person would no longer hold that attitude if they knew for sure that there's God? I mean, if the existence of God was not shrouded in mystery, then the people who have not yet been convinced would be. That's what these disadvantages are basically claiming. But you're making a fair point if you think, for example, that the mystery concerning whether he exists and the way that he is hidden, it's like you're implying that makes us not take him for granted. I want to agree with you, but it's like I have to think about it a little bit more. Because one part of me thinks that in case he wasn't hidden and his existence was undeniable, then why would people take it for granted then? People would be like, okay, I need to win the favor of this being. I need to be on good terms with this being because I know he exists and I know that he's all powerful and I know that he will judge me and he can do anything he wants. So I think in my view, I don't know. I feel like it would make people more allegiant to the being and more dedicated to it because there would be elimination of all doubt. But that's anyway the author. Maybe I'm speaking on the behalf of the author, but that's, I guess, his view. Sarah, like how people who praise celebrities sometimes treat them not so great because they don't get what they want from them. Well, yeah, but it's a little different, though. We're talking about you don't know if he exists or not, Sarah. It's almost like what you're saying is, oh, he does exist. So the question is he going to hide himself or not? Him being hidden, maybe he doesn't exist at all, right? So it's not just like I'm not going to show myself to you so that means you have more incentive to pray to me. We're talking about people who do not believe that he exists, not people who think he exists but he's hidden so I can ignore him. You understand? There's a little difference there. Okay, Ismail, you say people do have a tendency to take for granted things that they experience and see very regularly, so maybe we would take God for granted. You know, okay, putting it that way, I kind of understand what you mean, but people take things for granted that are not God. I mean, would be a different case, you know, like the existence of God I don't think would be something that anyone would be able to just ignore like you know, the news channels that you don't want to watch because they are like depressing. This would be God after all. And you would know that it's not like thinking aliens exist, but it's thinking that something exists who's ultimately going to dispense with your soul in the end. So you'd have every motivation, I think, following the doctrines of whatever religion you do follow to be on his good side. But anyway, I digress. It's a good conversation. So I appreciate those comments. One here, okay, you see the point on the top? Another claim is that with God hidden, it creates the space for social conflict and disagreement. So here, let me explain. You guys know for a fact that there have been plenty of wars and conflicts throughout history over the question of God, which religion to follow, or what doctrines to practice. Even within one and the same religion, people of different denominations have sometimes come to blows and, you know, had even violent conflicts. What is it that divides individuals, societies, friendships, families over the question of religion and God? Well, it's because people can have these diverse interpretations of what God wants, what his message is, and what he's asking you to do. With God being hidden, people can debate and disagree over all these interpretations. If he wasn't hidden, though, you'd think he could put everyone on the same page and say, look, here I am, let's just clarify this and get everyone together. This is the exact nature of the faith that I want you to practice. These are the doctrines that I want you to uphold in your life. And then there would no longer be room for some people to say, well, I know what God wants, and it's different from what you think he wants. With God not being able to step forward as an arbiter of these disputes, since he's remaining hidden, the disputes linger on, and people will fight, kill, etc. over them. So if God wasn't hidden, we could all agree, I guess, is his point, on what the nature of religion and religious practice should be. And then the last point he made, under the listing of disadvantages of God's hiddenness, was this point, that it also allows con artists and frauds to operate. Okay, so let me make a point about this current item here. So definitely there have been cases in history today and going back in the past of people who've used the idea of religion or spirituality to promote their own self-interest and their own agenda, financial or otherwise, right? Here's one obvious case that wouldn't offend anybody. Take cult leaders, right? Somebody who establishes a cult and then ends up taking a bunch of money from the people, getting their total devotion, maybe in the end asking them to all commit suicide, like in the Jonestown Massacre, the Jim Jones cult back in the 70s. So a person like that, how is it that they can get footing? How is it that they can win this loyal and dedicated following? Well, because they'll make quasi-religious claims. They'll say, I have divine insight. God is speaking to me. Maybe I'm the recipient of a divine revelation. And therefore, I'm the emissary of God and everybody has to listen to me. A person who presents themselves in this way can sometimes win very fanatical legion of supporters. But what is the reason that they can go and do this undetected? Well, because God being hidden, he's shrouded in his hiddenness, so he can't step forward and say, hey, to my true followers, don't listen to this individual or that individual who are trying to manipulate and pervert the nature of my message to mankind for their own benefit. Since he can't step forward and expose those that are engaged in a fraudulent kind of scheme, using religion as a pretense, since he can't expose them for what they are, since he remains hidden, then they act with impunity and they're going to win some fans and converts. So these frauds and con artists could never get their message out if there actually was this non-hidden God that could expose anyone to the light of day if they tried to provide religious messaging that was inconsistent with the true nature and faith of God and his preferred manner of practice. So if God wasn't hidden, going back through these 5 points, the author McKim is claiming that everyone would believe in him because there'd be no room to doubt it. He would be out there and you'd see it. Furthermore, everyone would want to have a close personal relationship with him because they would know that it was going to pay off and that it wasn't for nothing, because you would know that there's really a being with whom you're having the relationship. Third, if God wasn't hidden, people would be able to get over their skepticism and their hesitancy to totally devote themselves and worship him, since they would know that the being whom they are worshiping really exists, as a matter of fact. And then the social conflict and disagreement that comes from religious clash or doctrinal disputes, that would be eliminated, because a God that was revealed and out in the open would be able to show who is doing something that was inconsistent with the nature of the practice he wants us to have. And finally, con artists and frauds would be exposed to the light of day if they were practicing a form of religion or spirituality that deviates from what God really wanted. So in the end, then McKim just returns to his main theme, which is that if God does exist and stays hidden on purpose and leaves us to deal with all the different disadvantages that he's mentioned, then maybe it's the case that God doesn't care so much whether we believe in him or not. Because again, he claims that if he did, then he would have revealed himself. So if God doesn't care whether we believe in him or not, then that removes all of the stakes that Pascal's wager mentioned. Only on the assumption that God cares enough to reward believers and punish non-believers does Pascal's wager give us a incentive to think that belief is the safer bet. Okay, so we can now complete that whole discussion, and Robert McKim is now behind us. And I just have one last author, and then we'll wrap up this religion material and we're on to the next topic in the semester. So one more author, and this will be it on religion stuff. This is Nicholas Everett. Okay, Everett. And this is a paper from 2004. So he's a relatively current day philosopher. He's a British philosopher who teaches in the University of East Anglia in England. This paper from 2004 is called Theism and Modern Science. Theism and Modern Science, that's the title. And let me just give you some of the basic details, and then we'll get into even more of those details. From the title, what he's saying is, probably many of you have heard that there seems to be somewhat a conflict, a tension between a religious perspective on the world and a scientific perspective on the world. Many probably have heard it said that if you're really heavy into a scientific way of looking at reality, then you're not going to be the most religious person. Or if you're really, really a devoutly religious person, and vice versa, you might reject certain scientific claims or theories. Some people think that the conflicts and tensions between science and religion don't really exist. Some people think that they can somehow be merged together, or that they can be interpreted in a way where they align with one another. But this man, Nicholas Everett, says no, there really are contradictions and conflicts between science and religion, and he's out to show you in this paper what they really are. So his goal in the paper is to reveal to every reader why science and religion kind of don't go together, why modern scientific understanding of the universe and the place of man in the universe seems to be out of line with what we would have thought if religious claims were true, if God existed. So basically that's preview. He's going to say what's up with the tensions between science and religion, why do they exist? Okay, so that's the author's name, title of the paper, and the year of publication, 2004. All right, so let me then help you understand this paper. On page 66, which is the first page of the article in the book, he provides this kind of formal argument that drives his essay forward. And we have to kind of grapple with that argument for a bit, even though at first pass it's going to look a little technical maybe, but I'll try to bring it down to earth so that everyone can clearly understand what it's saying. All right, so bear with me as I write it out, and you'll find the same argument written on page 66. So here we go. First premise. Okay, so with arguments in logic and philosophy, I think I've said this at least one time before, maybe when we discussed the problem of evil argument. But arguments are built out of premises and conclusions. The premises, often numbered, like you see here, are the statements that serve as evidence towards the conclusion. And the conclusion is placed at the bottom of the argument in what's called standard form. This line separates the premises above from the conclusion below. So here's the argument, and I'm going to write it out, and then we'll discuss it after that. Okay, so here we go. First of all, first premise. It's an if-then statement. What it says is, if there is a being with, I might need a little more room here, so I'm just going to leave that open for the moment. If there's a being with nature N and intention I, then in that case, the being will produce change C in the world. Okay, so there's our first premise. And I'll explain. It says, if there is a being with nature N and intention I, then that being will produce change C in the world. Okay, so what's up with these letters N, I, and C? So first of all, what it's saying is, if there's a being with nature N is just a placeholder, like a variable in math, which stands for whatever the specific nature of the being hypothesized to be. So it's like what the being is like, what its attributes and so on would be like. Intention I. The letter I is also a placeholder for whatever the given intention of the agent might be. So whatever its goals would be, for example, or whatever it wants to do, you see. Change C refers to the behaviors that the being would do if it did exist. Like, so supposing that we had a being in the world with a certain type of description and certain goals, we assume that in that case it would do certain things, labeled in this case as change C, okay? So then the second premise of the same argument continues from there to say this: the world does not display C. Okay, two premises. Just again, to be careful and precise. Premise one: if there was a being with nature and an intention I, then in that case it would do these things C. But suppose that you look around for these behaviors that you would have expected if the being did exist, and you do not see the world displaying those behaviors or those changes. After having not seen those expected behaviors, we then can conclude that there is evidence that the being does not exist. Okay, so that's our conclusion based on these two premises. And I know, like I said, it looks a little technical and so on at first, but let me bring it down to earth with a quick example. And this is the example that the author uses. So let's try and understand his own case. He asks us to entertain a scenario, hypothetical scenario of like a stranded, shipwrecked person who arrives on a deserted island, okay? Have you guys ever heard of any films or novels that have that as the main plot line? I think probably some of you have. If you have, go ahead and let me know in the chat what is like a clear example of that type of narrative. I'm talking about someone was traveling somewhere and then something happened to their plane or boat, which then caused them to somehow arrive stranded, wash ashore on a deserted island, and they're there by themselves. Maybe they're waiting for a rescue mission, but they don't know if it'll ever come. Okay, very good there. Yes, one is Robinson Crusoe, the classic of English literature from the 19th century. And more recently, some of you have heard of Castaway. Yeah, it's a film with Tom Hanks. I think it's a pretty well-known film. He put on a pretty good performance. It's with Wilson, the volleyball that becomes his like best friend or whatever. There have been a couple of other, the show Lost, that's another reference. Sure, Alicia. There's the old TV show Gilligan's Island, except in that case there's a group of them, not just one. Same with Lost. It's not just one person in Lost, but yes, you understand. It's like they show up on an island trying to find a way off. Okay, so I want you to place within your mind that type of setting, okay? Like imagine in your mind a person who, through some kind of unfortunate naval or aviation accident, finds themselves stranded now on an island alone, okay? Now, suppose that this person now that has washed ashore on the island is asking or thinking this question: could there be any other survivors like me that have also managed to find their way to the shore of the island? Like basically he's thinking this: I've grabbed a piece of plywood from the boat and floated towards this beach. Maybe was another passenger on the same boat also capable of surviving, swimming, whatever, towards the same beach. And so am I the only one here? Maybe I have some other human inhabitant that, like me, is also now stranded on this island. And if I go and look for them and I find them, that would be great because we could help each other survive, and we could, do our best to survive and help each other until we get some kind of rescue or escape from the island, right? So, long story short, one guy washes ashore after this accident, and he's thinking this while he's sitting on the beach now. Is there someone else here? Maybe there is. Maybe I'm not the only one that survived the crash. So he's thinking now in terms of this first premise. Okay, now let's plug in for this premise. He says, if there is another survivor who's a person like me and who wants to be discovered on the island, then they would do certain things on the island. Okay, so these changes C, in other words, would be like the behavior and signs that our stranded individual would look for in searching for a possible other survivor. Okay, so beneath all the somewhat overly complex verbiage, it's really just saying if you thought that a certain type of being existed, then you could predict or guess what behaviors it would do, and then you would go and look for those behaviors. So, question to you guys now really fast. What do you think would be the behaviors that you'd look for? What kind of signs would you be looking for if you were trying to investigate the question of, is there another survivor on a stranded, deserted island with you? Like, so before you get up off of the beach to walk around, you set your mind to look for the signs of another survivor. And so you're thinking in your mind, I will now go out and search for what kind of things? What would be these changes C, to be precise, specified by this first premise in this example of the shipwrecked sailor or whoever? You'd go out and you might look for things like, let me know, what things? That's the question. And you'll let me know. Okay, good, Anthony. So you say fire. That's one possibility, right? You look around, maybe you're looking for a little fire pit because if there's another survivor, they may be trying to, cook or to take shelter. So there's another thing, Diego, maybe some kind of shelter. Maybe you look around for a little enclosure where a person could shield themselves from the elements and sleep at night, right? Water, Moises, well, I don't know. I mean, it's a beach, so there's the ocean right there. But you mean like maybe like bottles or something, like a sign that they'd carried some with them. That makes sense. Food and shelter, right? Like, so evidence of hunting, maybe crude tools, like if they're trying to go through the island, kill certain animals to use them for food or fish. You might look for tracks. You might look for a big SOS in the sand. You might look for footprints. You might listen for sounds, right? If this person if there is another survivor, maybe they would be likely to make sounds. So you walk around the island, calling out, you canvass it high and low. Let's say you leave no stone unturned. So you do a very thorough search of the island, looking for just those signs that you've mentioned. But, okay, and continue now to the second premise. Suppose that having conducted this search through the whole island, you don't see any signs like that. No fire, no footprints, no shelter, no sounds, no SOS, nothing. Okay, so having looked thoroughly for the signs you would have expected if there were another survivor, but not having seen any such signs, you would then be able to reach a conclusion. So what would be the conclusion of our character having looked for all those signs but didn't see any? It's easy enough, but just let me know. If you're following the argument, it's pretty clear. You can tell me. Post-search, after the search, our shipwrecked individual might conclude, since they didn't see any of those signs at all that would have been indicative of another survivor, what may they conclude? What would you conclude? You looked all around and you didn't see any of those signs. Okay, so then Diego, yeah, you're saying that nobody's there and you're the only survivor, correct? So it's the failure to see the expected behaviors that gives you the evidence that this hypothetical survivor doesn't exist, yeah? That they're alone in this situation. So this becomes like a general format of argument. And the basic format is this. If you thought some type of being existed, right, then that would give you a sense of what things that it would do if it did exist. Now, if you go out into the world and you seek for evidence of those signs, but you do not see any, that gives you a reason to think that there was no such being as this, okay? Like, I can give you other examples. Here's a real life example, okay? Just so you can get another look at the same argument from a different angle. When I was a very young little kid, I'm talking like 5, 6 years old, one of my earliest memories actually. Like every kid does, I was hearing things from my parents and stuff about Santa coming around Christmas time. You know, this guy's gonna come give you gifts with his sleigh. You know, he's gonna come down the chimney. You all know about Santa. So I was told this, but I don't know if it shows, I don't know what it says about me, if I was meant to be like a philosopher or something, but you know, even at that tender young age, I was already thinking critically like, is it true? What are they telling me? They say this Santa's coming, but it sounds weird. I don't know how that could really be true. I had all kinds of skeptical thoughts, like how does he fly? Like how does a sleigh fly? They say it's got reindeer, but the reindeer don't have wings. So is this just magic? And how does he keep all the gifts in the bag? You know, how does he circumnavigate the whole planet with all the people that want gifts in one night? You know, I had all these thoughts as a kid, so I was kind of skeptical. Of course, my parents were like, don't worry, magic, he's just gonna come, okay? So anyway, I wasn't satisfied with that answer, so I said this. If there really is this mythical gift giver who wants to show up on Christmas and give me some gifts, then there's certain things that he's gonna do. So what I actually did is keep in mind, I'm very young, 5, 6, so I sit in front of the chimney, because we had a chimney fireplace back then. And I just said, look, if this Santa exists, then what I should see tonight by staying up and looking at the chimney is what? Like I should see, you know, a jolly old man with a red suit coming down that chimney. Or I should at least hear ho, 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 like from the sky. Or I should hear the pitter-pat of hooves of the reindeer. You know, sleigh bells jingle jangling in the sky. I should have heard some of these things if he exists. And so I waited and waited, and sad to say, but I didn't see any of those things that I would have expected in case Santa was real. So I came to the conclusion that, maybe there's no such thing as him, because the behaviors that I was looking for, in case he existed, that you would expect, I didn't see any signs of those when I put myself in position to observe. So you can formulate a range of apt behavior, appropriate behavior that a being would display if it existed. And then if the search for it doesn't show any such signs of that behavior, maybe there's no such being after all. I'm not trying to compare the majestic concept of God with Santa or any of the other things, but the author gave this example of the stranded island. I'm giving you a real life example, so it makes the same kind of point, but maybe it has a little more pop or something. Anyway, now, to the real question that we are more interested in, not these funny scenarios of Santa or the island, but what about God, though? And that's where Everett says we're going next. So he says this, looking at this argument, suppose that God exists, and he's this all-powerful creator of the universe, and his intention creating the universe was something specific. He created this universe, why? To have a place for the children of God created in his image to live, us human beings. If the stories of religion are true, then humans are not supposed to just be some random thing on the side that just appeared through chance. We're supposed to have been an intended act of God, that he created us in his image. So we're supposed to be like the crown jewel of creation. Like God cares for all the creation, but he takes a special interest in man because he's graced us according to, the Old Testament and Genesis stories. He's graced us with knowledge and insight into good and evil. So we're the children of God formed in his image. That means that this universe, according to what Everett sees, it should be a universe, if God created it for us, that revolves around human beings, and it should be on a human scale. So if God really created the universe just for the sake of man to live in it, then what would be the universe we should expect to find? Now I'll erase this so I can create more notes. And I'm going to list for you what he thinks of what would be a so-called apt universe. This is like the logical equivalent of the behavior you'd expect to see in case a given being existed. Like so with the stranded sailor example, looking through the island for signs of another survivor. Or in my Santa Claus example, staying up at night and looking at the chimney, looking for the signs I'd expect if there was a Santa. So what are the things we would expect this universe to be like if it was created by God for the purposes of man? Okay, so here's the apt universe that we would expect if it was created by God for us. First of all, you would expect that human beings would appear early in the history of the universe. So mankind would appear early in the universe. Okay, so consider this. If God did create this world for the sake of us humans specifically, then why wouldn't you'd think he would put us at the very beginning of the creation, right? And in the Genesis stories of creation, they say that, right? It says that God created all things in 7 days, and on the seventh day he rested. And of course, it wouldn't have made sense to any interpreters of the Old Testament if they had said God waited for billions of years and then he put man in there. Because what would be the reason for God to have delayed the appearance of man by so much time if we are the sole reason for the whole existence of the universe? That would be like creating a universe for man, but without the main purpose of the whole thing existing until much later. So you'd expect if God did make this as a universe for our sake, then we would appear very early in the history of it, as it says in Genesis. Okay? A second thing that you'd expect is this. Mankind would appear not much longer after the other non-human animals. Okay, so not long after the other animals, the non-human animals. Okay, so again, he's saying this. If God created the universe solely for the sake of human beings to inhabit it, not only would he have put us in there early, but you'd also think that he wouldn't have delayed too much after the other animals existed, the arrival of mankind. What would be the point of having all these non-human animals populating the planet Earth for billions of years, and for mankind to appear much later in the history of the planet Earth, if the purpose of all this in the first place was for us to exist? Now he says, you might have thought, well, God might have wanted to put the animals before us a little bit in time because that would give us things to hunt, eat, use for clothing, shelter, labor, like, horse-drawn carriages and stuff. So he might have wanted to have some of the other animals in there before us so we could use them. But it doesn't make that much sense to have them in there way, 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 way before us, because the whole universe, if it was created by God for the sake of man, you'd think man would appear in it early enough after the other animals. What would be the point of the time delay? Okay, now the third thing he said is that you'd also expect the planet Earth to be in the middle of everything. So the Earth should be in the center of the universe. Okay, so once again, if God created the universe for the sake of us human beings to inhabit it, you would also expect that we would have privileged position in the universe. So we would have a central position and everything should rotate and revolve around us. If we're literally the point of the whole creation being created, then shouldn't we occupy the center point of the universe? And that was also very important to early generations of the church, all the way up until the work of Galileo and Copernicus, so like in the late medieval period, early Renaissance, we started to develop these telescopes which had greater power of observation into the night sky. And they could start to observe the motions of the local celestial objects. And they determined that no, the sun does not rotate around us, but we and all the other planets rotate in a smooth elliptical orbit around the sun, which is just scientific consensus fact that everyone agrees with now, including all those members of the church. But for a long time, this was a suppressed idea and it was considered heretical because it made people think that, well, I'm not so sure that God's the creator if we don't occupy some privileged position. If we're just this random third planet, not even in the center of our own local solar system, then it doesn't appear like the whole system of nature revolves around us. So people like Galileo, actually, he was threatened under penalty of death to recant his testimony publicly by the church for fear that it would turn people away from the Bible and from religion. Now, in the centuries since that has happened, the church has formally apologized to Galileo and his descendants because with the benefit of hindsight, we know for a real fact that the sun is at the local center of our cosmos rather than the earth. And when you take a step back from just the solar system to the whole universe, it almost doesn't make sense to say there could be a center since it's immeasurably large and constantly expanding. But anyway, I digress. So you'd expect that the earth would be in the center of the universe, a very important idea for Orthodox religion for many, many generations. Only finally relinquishing the view under overwhelming scientific evidence to the contrary. And finally, you would also think this, that the universe overall would not be vastly larger than the Earth. What would be the point of having all this additional space that we can never go to, that we can never interact with? If the planet Earth was made for the sake of human beings and God created the universe for humans on the planet Earth, then why wouldn't he have shrunk the universe down a little bit more to the scale of the planet Earth? So you would expect the universe would not be vastly larger than the Earth. Okay, so the universe would not be vastly larger than the Earth would be. So he's saying this. These features listed here are the changes C, as it were, that you would expect this world, this universe to display if it was really the result of a creator God making it for the sake of human beings specifically. You would think that if we're the point of the whole creation, really, then we should appear early because we're the point of everything. So why would we appear at the end? We should appear early, not that much longer after the other animals. We should be right smack in the middle of everything. And the whole universe as a whole would not be so much vastly larger than our planet. But now he says, compare these expected findings of the universe to what scientific research has shown in the modern scientific era. All four of these things appear to have nothing to do with the actual nature of the universe, at least according to scientific consensus research. So first of all, does man appear early in the universe? Well, not if you follow science. According to science, we are way, way late to arrive at the party, as it were. So the universe, according to the most, I guess, reliable estimates that people have, is something on the order of a 15 billion year time span. Now, in that whole 15 billion years, the Earth is about 5 billion years old. But on the planet Earth, human beings, depending on how you define us, but at the current version Homo sapiens, most think this goes back in time maybe 100,000 or to 500,000 years max. Well, 500 to 100,000 years in comparison to 15 billion years is a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall timeline, okay? So we actually appear, if you follow this evolutionary scientific account of the origins of man, we appear in the last tiny, tiny 99.9999 percentile of the history of the universe. To give you a visual explanation of that, suppose that this line here is a 24-mile line. That's almost the length of a regulation marathon. If you guys know, that's 26.2 miles, a pretty good length, especially to run. Well, if this 24-mile line represents the history of the universe, then relative to it, mankind would appear in the last 2 inches of the 24 miles. So we're not early, at least if the scientific claim is to be believed. We're far from it, we're extremely late. Or if you want to condense, let's say you don't want a visual metaphor, take a temporal metaphor. Suppose that we could condense the history of the universe down to 1 year of 1 Earth year. Relative to that 1 year, mankind would appear in the last 2 seconds of that 1 year of time. So right as everyone's about to say Happy New Year and we're rolling into the next year on the calendar, at that tail end is when human beings pop into the picture. So by any account, we do not appear to be things that appeared way early, as it says in Genesis, which of course was written with this in mind in the first 7 days of creation. Not at all. Secondly, what about the other animals? Well, even in that case, we're still late arrivers. On the planet Earth, for over 90% of the Earth's history, a lot of the life that was there was, well, I shouldn't say over 90% of the Earth's history, but for the early initial time period where life was just getting started, scientific accounts claim that this was mostly primordial, microbial, and single cellular life. And it took billions and billions of years for these early primordial life forms to become more complex, to specialize into then becoming vertebrate organisms, reptilian, and eventually mammalian, and of course humans from there. So we're not early to the overall history of the universe, nor are we really early to the overall history of the planet Earth, even if you just tunnel vision into the planet Earth's timeline. Third, we are not in the center of the universe. I think I've already now explained that. We know for a fact that we're the third planet from the sun, and we owe a debt of gratitude to Galileo and Copernicus for using the newly invented telescopes to show this. Of course, it's been verified a million billion times since then with every new scientific generation, and we have powerful tools of observation now, cameras, satellites, much more powerful telescopes, and so on. So, no, we're not in the center of the universe. And then finally, is the universe not too much bigger than the Earth? Definitely not. It's way bigger than the planet Earth. The scale of the universe is almost mind-boggling. It's very hard to communicate how big it really is, but let me just give you one quick fact. Our sun is 93 million miles from us right now on the planet Earth, and that's a pretty significant distance, 93 million miles. But if you want to go to the next closest star, that's Alpha Centauri, and that's 4.3 light years away. That's just the next closest star, the closest one to the sun. 4.3 light years, how far is that? Okay, so a light year is the distance that an object would travel if it was moving at the speed of light for a full year. And the speed of light is the maximum possible speed that's achievable in the universe, because light is the conveyor of all information. So it's 300,000 kilometers per second, or going away from the metric system, 186,000 miles per second. Okay, every 1 second of time, a beam of light would travel 186,000 miles. So imagine an object moving at that rate, 186,000 miles, not per hour, per second, and doing that for a full year, not just 1 year, for 4.3 years, like a full presidential term. It's that much speed and that much time to just take you to the next closest star. But not only are there billions of stars, there are billions of galaxies which house these stars. And so the scale of the universe is immense in how vast it really is. And so in comparison to that large scope of space, the planet Earth is actually infinitesimally small, as though a small piece of dust in the bigger cosmic framework. Now, interesting historical aside, if you go back into the ancient days, some of the Greeks writing back then thought that what we recognize today as stars, very distant gaseous objects in space, they thought that they were actually pinholes that were poked in a shell that encases the Earth. And that's just light that's shining through from the heavens outside of this shell. And therefore, the universe they didn't think was as big as it is today. So it would have been hard for people to comprehend a lot of these facts about cosmology and astronomy that we know today. Nonetheless, the author returns to his major conclusion. If we would have thought that God would make a universe where we appear early, not long after the other animals, right in the middle, and not having all this unusable space that has nothing to do with our civilization or our people, well, science would appear to contradict all of these. According to science anyway, we did not appear early at all in the universe, nor did we appear quickly after the animals. We're not in the center, and we're tiny and small in the bigger cosmic picture. So he says then, this is why religion and science don't exactly go well together, because the scientific claims of modern day consensus contradict at least traditional assumptions that people might have had about religion. So in light of these contradictions and tensions, people have their own set of options. Some people will say, if science and religion don't coalesce, I'm going to favor the scientific view and reject religion when it disagrees with it. Other people will say, no, I'm going to hold fast to my religious points of view, and if science conflicts with this, then I'm going to have to reject the scientific account. And other people will try to finesse a middle ground where we say, I don't know, maybe there's some compatibility between them. Maybe when it said in the Bible, God created the universe in 7 days, those weren't literal days. Maybe those were millions of years, billions of years, right? So sometimes people try and come up with a new interpretation or a reinterpretation of what some call biblical literalism to make space for these newly arriving scientific discoveries. But anyway, that's the full menu of options for you. I don't say that this Everett article is precisely an objection to Pascal or the other authors. In a way, it's his own presentation of how science and religion can be in conflict. But I guess in a way, it's also somewhere in the ballpark of rejecting a claim that Pascal made, which is that there's no way of having evidence that God exists or that he doesn't exist. So you're just going to have to make a wager with no proof for either side. Everett, I guess, according to his view anyway, and his analysis, would not agree with this. He would say there is actually evidence, the non-existence of God. There's scientific evidence because the quality of the universe that you'd expect, the qualities of the universe that you'd expect to be there are just not seen when we investigate it scientifically. So, I don't know, another thing for you to spin your wheels about and consider as you're working towards your first essays. Don't forget those first essays are due next week on Wednesday, so you still have plenty of good time to work on them. And to anybody who is developing their paper and would like any comments or anything else, I'm always free to help out if you want to send me something or if you want to come through to office hours. So anyway, we're going to now move on from the whole religion topic. Now we are all done with that. And so that takes us to the second major topic of the semester. So one thing I know that I will have to do, and so just so we know right now, there's an article listed in our schedule, in our syllabus for this Wednesday, and that was called Extreme and Restricted Utilitarianism by J.J.C. Smart. That's one article that I'll have to eliminate from the list just to make space for some of our good discussions throughout the first few weeks. So I don't want us to fall too far behind, and that's one article that I can easily take out because it's just a little bit of an additional elaboration on the work of John Stuart Mill, which is more fundamental for us. So just know that on Wednesday, we're going to be focused on this John Stuart Mill writing of utilitarianism, and the article by J.J.C. Smart, Extreme and Restricted Utilitarianism, we're going to eliminate that to make room for the lecture that I have to bump over towards Wednesday. And then after Wednesday, the remaining dates on the schedule will all remain the same, unless otherwise noted later on. Okay? So our second topic of the semester now, we've finished with philosophy of religion. In philosophy, there's many different subject areas and specialties. Like in science, sometimes people study biology, some study chemistry, some study physics. In philosophy, some focus on philosophy of religion, and there are other topics that are also specialties for others, including this one, which is ethics. So for the next couple weeks, we're going to focus on this new subject in philosophy, and it's ethics. Now, what is ethics? Overall, ethics is the study of morality and moral concepts. The study of morality and moral concepts. So now, that's the definition here. I'm going to put a list of moral concepts here below. And I know that we're running low on time, but let's just take ourselves to the end by trying to come up with some examples here. If I asked you, what words or concepts come to your mind when you hear the word ethics, morality, etc.? Can anybody tell me, just what pops up in your mind? Hot take, reaction, buzzwords, whatever, that come into view when you think of ethics. Knowing that it's the study of morality, tell me anything that you think of when you think of morality or ethics. Laws, okay, culture. I like that, Derek, but one thing I'm going to have to, well, we'll get into it. We'll get into it nice and detailed, but laws often take their inspiration from our sense of right and wrong. But laws are not in every case a reflection of morality, because sometimes laws forbid behavior that's not wrong morally, and sometimes the laws permit behavior that is in itself immoral. So there's obviously room for moral criticism of laws, but I like your suggestion, and we'll get back into that later. Being honest, okay, that's an example of moral behavior. I like what David and Brandon have put here. So let's think about those kind of contrasting binaries in morality, good and bad. Morally good versus morally bad. I also see that you wrote right or wrong, another pair of moral concepts, right versus wrong. We're thinking of moral right versus moral wrong. Not like wrong answer in math or something, but like something ethically wrong. Okay, what else? Let's build on this kind of genre here. We have the positive and the negative sides of a moral divide. So there's right, wrong, there's good, bad. Can anybody else think of a pair of moral binaries that are on opposites like this? There's a couple more, not a million, but just a few that we could put in there too. I'll throw some out there if you don't have more on your mind, but let's see if anyone can toss out another, following in the same footsteps of these examples. Right and wrong, good and bad, or we could add to this what? Death versus life. Well, okay, I understand. Generally, it's a bad thing to die, and it's a good thing to live. Dark versus light. Only thing about that, Kevin, is that those are like shades of tone, like how bright or dark something is. And I understand that, like in Star Wars and stuff, you got the dark side and the Jedis, and that's like a well-worn theme in literature. But overall, there can be things that are dark that are not bad, and there can be things that are light that are. So I don't want to necessarily play too heavily on that. It also comes together with tropes of like whiteness and blackness and all that stuff. So, but I understand totally the point. Lesser of two evils. Okay, Tina, I like this. Just and unjust. That's a good one. Sometimes people say that a person did the just and the right thing morally. Other times someone will be condemned and criticized for doing something labeled or claimed to be unjust or an injustice. Just and unjust, good and bad, right and wrong. How about moral versus what's the opposite? Immoral. And now that you guys kind of see this coming into focus, we could continue down the line, but I'm just going to add one more. Since we already took this note, I'm going to erase the top and put one more moral concept on the board. You can also have, because morality is a lot about how you act and how you choose to act. So we can also just describe it in terms of what a person should do and what they shouldn't do on a moral basis. So I'll put it this way: what one ought versus ought not to do. Okay, so when you or anybody evaluates an action, a practice, or an institution, and you judge in either of these ways, you're engaged in moral reasoning, or you're reflecting on ethics at that time. Sometimes you're the moral judge of others' conduct, or even your own, or social practices and institutions. Sometimes you're the subject of other people's moral judgments, or the moral judgments of collectivities like society or the laws, yeah? But as a human being, we cannot escape the concept of moral judgment. It's something that we live with. It's something that we understand. In a way, it kind of does make us a different kind of life form than animals who simply eat, sleep, reproduce, and pass away. But we erect these very detailed structures of law, which hold people accountable to some kind of shared sensibility of moral standards and norms. You know, it's not like lions and tigers out there. If someone did something harmful, then they're going to be detained and held accountable by others. I mean, it's just, you know, survival of the fittest type of thing. But we have morality. We're human beings, right? So whenever you're evaluating a behavior, practice, or institution on either of these ways, that's moral judgment. You are sometimes a moral judge. Sometimes you're the subject of others' moral judgment. That's what I said. So you can look at a practice and say, you know, what these people are doing or what this individual did was just wrong. They should never do that. Or on the other side, this is really good and credit to them, you know, good on them. They did the right thing. This person acted in a way that was very moral, even though it was difficult. So I really respect them. Or no, I'm going to condemn somebody because what they did was just simply immoral and that should never be done, and I condemn it. So morality, it looms large in our lives. And now what you guys are going to learn is that there have been some established theories of morality that have been developed in the Western world. Many of you, probably most or some of you anyway, think of morality as totally subjective. You know, what's right to me might be wrong to another person, and that's just two different opinions. There's no fact of the matter. Well, that's called moral relativism, and that's one way of looking at morality. But the most prevalent theories of morality that exist in the written works of philosophy are more along the level of what's called moral universalism. They believe there really are objective principles of morality that the mind can discover. And so what we're going to do is study and examine probably the two most powerful prevailing moral theories that we've developed in the West. One of them is utilitarian ethics, and that's often associated with the man John Stuart Mill. So we're going to talk about him on Wednesday for sure. And then next week, when we continue on the same subject of ethics, we'll talk about the major rival to utilitarianism, and that's Kantian ethics, given to us by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. So knowing about Kantian and utilitarian ethics will give you a framework for evaluating moral decisions and perspectives, and that helps give us structure to our moral reflection and thought. Sometimes you just get intuitions, you know, you just feel stuff, like I just feel like that's wrong, or I just feel like that was really good and righteous. But having moral theories to apply to the facts of different situations allows you to have a little bit more of a principled way of approaching whether you think something is right or wrong. So we're going to at least learn the principles that are based around utilitarian and Kantian ethics. On Wednesday, we'll start with the utilitarian work of John Stuart Mill. So do read that paper. It was listed originally in the calendar for today's date, but as I said just a moment ago, to create additional room for all the lectures and conversations, one thing had to be removed, and that would have been the Wednesday lecture. So I've taken that off, and in its place, we're sliding John Stuart Mill over that one day. Okay, so that's the plan for next time. Other than that, I think I've given you all the notes for today that I wanted to give. So are we all good, everybody? Just checking in with you one last time. If you'd like, go ahead and just say so long or goodbye, and I'll see you back on Wednesday. Just want to make sure I didn't lose anyone before I close the meeting. So are we all good, everybody? Let me know. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good day. I'll see you back on Wednesday. And if you need anything at all, like, you can email me anytime. I also have my office hours every Wednesday and Monday. So, well, today office hours are done, but maybe on Wednesday, if anyone wants to swing by, you can do that. Okay. Thanks, Derek. I like the disjunction. So long. Okay, well, I'll see you guys then next time. Take it easy, and bye-bye.